Okay, we're going to go through the next step in the ethical thinking process, the assignment that we're going to do. So first we went through what is an ethical question. The next thing we did is we looked at the 8 key questions, specifically with the example of the pandemic flu and who you were going to give the vaccine to and who you weren't, and based on your answers to the questions you felt were most important, who you saved. The next process is to go into a ethical question within the science area that actually exists. That topic is going to differ from semester to semester. What I'm giving you here, and all of you will have access to, and I will ask you to hand it in, either submit it through Blackboard or hand it in with your paper, is what I call a TUG sheet. This is a way, and I think I told you this the first video, your brain should hurt as you go through this process. Your brain should hurt because you're stretching it, and that's not a bad thing. So to help you put your thoughts together and get you on the right track for the questions that you're going to be asked, we're going to use this sheet. Now there's two sides to it. So what it does, it actually, I got it from a book called Visible Thinking, Making Thinking Visible. Put your thinking, what you're thinking, down on paper in an organized way, and hopefully that will help you with the questions that you're going to have to answer. So I'm going to pick an issue that's an ethical issue, and we're going to go through it as if that was the issue that we're going to discuss. It's not going to be the issue we're going to discuss, but it's going to show you how to fill out this form in order to help you. Now, you want to think of this form as an outline. When you answer the questions that you're going to actually use, that you're going to hand in, you're going to have to add more detail than you have on this form. If you just write what's on this form, there's not going to be enough discussion there. And I'll show you that later. Okay, so the question we're going to deal with, give you a little background history. Some children are born with not secreting enough growth hormone, and then so what happens is if they don't secrete enough growth hormone, obviously they're not as tall as somebody who secretes normal amounts of growth hormone. So growth hormone was actually first developed by scientists and researchers to help those children who were lacking growth hormone. And a side note, then athletes started using it illegal to help with healing and to help grow more muscle. But back to the main issue. But now what's happened in the last several years is that some doctors are giving growth hormone to children who have normal amounts of growth hormone, but are shorter than they're below a certain amount, below the average child of that age. So they're giving growth hormone to children with normal levels of growth hormone. Okay? So that brings up some interesting questions. Brings up medical questions, and it also brings up ethical questions. What you're doing is we're saying that being average or taller is more the exception or more the acceptable height than being shorter than average. Now I will tell you, those of you that don't have me actually in class, we're doing this issue because it'll be easy for me to explain, because I'm 5 feet, but that's on a good day, like when I first get up in the morning. So as soon as I get up and things start to slither down towards the ground, I'm probably like 4'11". So I'm going to use this issue as an example, because then I can talk about my context and what matters. Okay, so whatever issue I give you, you have to think about what is the ethical question. Okay, so the ethical question for this is, should we be giving children growth hormone who already have normal amounts of growth hormone? Okay. Now, why is the question important? Why is this a discussion? I'm not going to pick an issue that doesn't have issues throughout society. The issue we will be dealing with, you have to come up with why is it an important issue to discuss. Okay. So what I would write, and again, I'm just giving you a basic outline form. So why is this question important? Why do we have to have the discussion about this? So for the giving growth hormone to kids that have normal growth hormone question, the reason I would think we need to talk about it, first of all, is for medical reasons, because you're giving a hormone that causes growth to kids that already have normal amounts. Now, with my background in science, my thinking is that possibly could increase their chance of cancer down the road, or even when they're taking it. Okay. The other question, though, when you really get down to the ethics of this question is, are we saying that being a certain height is not acceptable in our society? And are we trying to push people to be taller than their genetics actually may make them? Okay. So why are we having this question? Because it seems like we're trying to change what is the norm. Okay. At some point, could it get to a point that 5'4" is no longer tall enough and you're supposed to be taller? Okay. So those are reasons why this question needs to be looked at. Okay, this is why these questions need to be looked at. So that takes care of this top part here. Now, this tug here, think of a tug of war, okay? And on a tug of war, you always put the strongest, biggest person back here, okay, on each end. We got two teams tugging against each other. So what you're looking at here is what are the two extreme viewpoints of this question, okay? For some questions, it's easier than others to come up with the extremes. Sometimes it's a little harder. Now, up here, and I'm just going to tell you that this came out of the book, and not the Shades of Gray book, but in the book that I used to develop this, the Shades of Gray has nothing to do with the movie or the book that most of you have seen, okay, or read. It is the in-between. So if we look at the extremes, right, here's the black point of view, here's the white point of view in terms of extremes. Gray is color in between the black and white. So what are viewpoints on this issue in between? All right, so let's look at the growth hormone example. On one extreme is that we should not be giving growth hormone to any child that has normal growth hormone levels. On the other side is we should be giving growth hormone to any, obviously the parents would make the decision, but to any child whose parents agree to give them the growth hormone. Again, it would depend on the age of the child. Now, in this one, there's really not an in-between issue, okay? There's really not an in-between example of somewhere in between, okay? You could argue that an in-between would be we could give growth hormone to a child, you know, after we've done research and looked at the safety of it and so on. But for other issues, there's going to be a lot of viewpoints in between these extreme viewpoints. Okay, so I'm just giving you kind of a general overview of the whole thing. The next thing you do, and we'll come back to this TUGs later, the next thing you do is, and we talked about the 8 key questions, which of the 8 key questions do you think is most important to look at for this specific viewpoint? Okay, for this specific viewpoint. So like we've talked about, not all 8 key questions have to be looked at for every question. So what you're going to do with yours is you're going to look at, okay, what questions do I think are most important? I'll give you one example for this issue is, for this specific issue with growth hormone, is outcomes. Okay. For me, why is that question important? Well, for me, outcomes is an important question because we don't necessarily know the medical effects and the health effects of putting a child that has normal growth hormone on synthetic growth hormone and increasing that growth hormone level. So what are the outcomes? Okay. Another one may be empathy for me. Okay. You know, this poor child's getting bullied at school. Do they, you know, having this, will it help them? That could be another key question. So again, and I'm not going to go real in depth on that with this specific question, but what are the most important 8 key questions and why do you pick those questions as being the most important? Okay. So that's the first side of the TUG sheet. Let me go to the other side. Okay. Okay, so this is other information. So it is a scientific issue. And we've talked about science does involve facts. Okay, science does involve facts. And that's one of the things I want you to know is that when you're doing this ethical question, we focused on different viewpoints and how there's not a right or wrong, but there are facts. There are facts that you have to know in order to make or come up with a solution to an ethical issue regarding science. Okay. So, what facts do you know about the issue? What facts don't you know that you need to look up? Or what facts do scientists need to know in order to come up with solutions to this ethical issue? So I know facts, you know, the things I know about growth hormone, I could write those down. Questions that remain unknown or that you need to know, one of the things I mentioned is we haven't done research looking at putting kids on extra growth hormone, what effect that has down the road. It hasn't been happening long enough to do that. I would have to understand the specifics of growth hormone. Right? If you don't know something about the science, then write that down. So when you give when you do your paper, if you screw up the facts, that throws your whole argument off. Okay, you've got to have the facts in order to make a good ethical argument. Okay, next we have to realize that the decisions we're making influence society. So you're going to have to think beyond yourself, okay? Beyond yourself. So this ethical dilemma about the growth hormone, who are the stakeholders? The children would be a good example of stakeholders. What's their role in this ethical dilemma? They're the ones getting the injections, okay? What kind of key questions from the child's point of view, okay? What would be their responses to some of those questions? You know, to the empathy question. You know, this poor kid may be thinking everyone's making fun of me. If I had this growth hormone and could grow, you know, they would stop making fun of me and so on. The parents could be another example of stakeholders. Right? Their role in the ethical dilemma, they may be thinking about outcomes. Outcomes, obviously they're the parents, but outcomes could be an issue for them. You know, yes, I want my child to be more accepted and not be made fun of because they're short, but they may also be thinking about outcomes from a health standpoint. Okay. Doctors are stakeholders in this issue. What's their role? I think it's a big role. They are the ones saying it is okay to do this. Not that all of them are, but the ones that are saying it's okay to do this. So they play a key role in this ethical dilemma. Now, what are their questions? What are the questions that you think they are thinking about? When the doctors make this decision to give this to the children, my hope is that they're going through some ethical thinking process. What do you think their answers to those questions? And again, depending on the question, it could be religious groups, it could be insurance companies, it can be lots of people, okay, who are stakeholders. So you have to think about who this ethical dilemma involves throughout society. Now there's another space on here for your viewpoint and responses to the most important 8 key questions. So you got facts here, you've got stakeholders. On this one, remember you looked at, and to be honest, you could probably write these questions here and then come back to the second page and do this. But sometimes by going through all of this, it may give you a better indication of what are your answers in viewpoints and responses to the key questions that you think are most important to this question. Okay? But by thinking about other people and thinking about other stakeholders and looking at the facts, it should and may influence your viewpoints or responses to those 8 key questions. So if we go back to the front page, the one thing that we haven't talked about are the tugs. So we've got this tug of war, we got these extreme viewpoints. You have to start thinking about what your solution to this problem is, or your viewpoint on the problem or ethical dilemma is. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, you need to start thinking about what is influencing your viewpoint. Okay? One thing that may influence your viewpoint are the facts. So let's say the fact that we don't know the side effects of giving children extra growth hormone. We don't know what the long-term effect is. Let's say that really affects my viewpoint on the issue, and it actually does. So if on this side we have that children who have normal growth hormone levels should not get growth hormone, extra growth hormone, that fact would pull me way to this side in my viewpoint. So I would write it over here. Okay? I would write, we don't know the long-term effects of growth hormone on children. Okay? Now let's say you're doing the same issue and that doesn't really matter to you. It doesn't really pull you one way or the other. It pulls you a little bit this way, but not too much. You would write it over here. Okay? Now let's say that I was a kid, when I was a kid and I was short and I was doing the same thing and I was just traumatized by my height, you know, blah, blah, blah. I need to have growth hormone. So my viewpoint back then may have been from an empathy standpoint, I need that growth hormone because people are making fun of me. And it influences my viewpoint way on this side. Then I'd put it over here. Okay. Now, for me right now, if you ask me, does my height influence my viewpoint on this issue? It actually does somewhat, that I don't think kids should be getting it. So being short is going to pull me towards this side actually, but I do have empathy for children, and so that may pull me a little bit towards this side, that kids should be allowed to get growth hormone. So I could put that here. Okay. You also need to think not only about facts, but you need to think about your answers to the 8 key questions. one of those questions may be very key to you, very, very important, and the answer to that question may pull you to one side or the other, so you can kind of scribble that in here. Okay. Also, the stakeholders may have a big influence on you. So if there's a stakeholder here and that really influences you and it has a strong impact on your viewpoint, then you can put that wherever it fits. Okay. Now, if there are shades of gray in there, or if there are in-between viewpoints that you think is a good solution or the right solution or the best solution for the situation, then you can, when you put that shade of gray option here, then a lot of your tugs should be sitting right in here because they're pulling you towards that viewpoint. Okay, towards that viewpoint. Okay, so that's what the tugs are. Okay, that's what the tugs are. So by the time you get this filled out, you should have an idea, at least a rough draft or an outline of what you need in order to write the answers to the questions that you're going to be asked. And in the next video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of the questions and show you where the information is, or tell you where the information is on these, and give you as much information as I can to lead you through the questions. I'm not going to answer them for you. I can't answer them for you. It's about your thinking and your viewpoint on an issue. Okay, so that's the end of this one. I know it's a lot of information, so you might want to listen to it a couple times just to get an idea of what you're supposed to be looking at for this. No one's sheets are going to look the same. Your ethical questions may be very similar and why it's important, but then you're going to get a lot different on the key questions, and then the stakeholders is going to differ from person to person. Okay, so that's where you've got to go through the thinking process. All right, that's the end of that video.